Richard Hale had everything people envied. He was a self-made millionaire CEO, owner of a thriving tech empire, and lived in a mansion that towered over the quiet suburban street like a fortress. Expensive cars lined his driveway, and his home was guarded by high hedges that kept the curious away. Yet, despite the wealth and power, his life felt like an empty chamber echoing with silence. He was notorious in the neighborhood for his cold demeanor, sharp words, and lack of interest in anyone's life. The neighbors whispered about him, how he never smiled, never joined community events, and never gave candy on Halloween. Children ran past his house, daring each other to knock on his door, but none ever did. To them, he was simply the grumpy old neighbor who had no heart. One crisp Monday morning, Richard sat at his desk by the tall window, sipping his black coffee and scrolling through endless reports from his assistants. His day was about to be filled with board meetings and aggressive negotiations, the kind of routine that dulled his spirit but kept his company afloat. As he adjusted his cufflinks, he heard a small, hesitant knock on his heavy oak door. He frowned. Nobody ever knocked on his door in the morning. Rising reluctantly, he opened it to see a little girl, maybe 7 years old, clutching a backpack nearly half her size. She had wide, hopeful eyes and pigtails tied with bright ribbons. "Hi," she said softly, tilting her head up. "My name's Emma. I just moved next door with my mom. Will you walk me to school?" Richard stared at her, baffled. No one had spoken to him so innocently in years, and certainly not a child. "Excuse me," he muttered, adjusting his tie as if the request had somehow wrinkled it. Emma nodded eagerly. "My mom has to work early, and she said I should walk. But the school is kind of far, and I thought, since you live next door, maybe you could walk with me. Please?" For a moment, Richard's instinctive response was to refuse. He had deadlines, calls, and an image to maintain. He was a CEO, not a babysitter. But when Emma's hopeful eyes shimmered with anticipation, something tugged at the corners of his stone heart. He sighed heavily. "Fine," he muttered, his voice gruff. "But only this once." Emma's face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. "Thank you, mister. You're the best." As they walked side by side, Richard's long strides slowed to match Emma's tiny steps. She chatted nonstop, about her new school, her favorite cartoons, her mom's amazing pancakes, and how she wanted to become a teacher one day. Richard, usually immune to chatter, found himself listening. Her innocent laughter filled the morning air, echoing against his walls of loneliness. For the first time in years, the CEO wasn't thinking about profit margins or quarterly reports. He was thinking about a child who trusted him without reason. When they reached the school gate, Emma turned to him and smiled. "Will you walk me again tomorrow?" she asked, her voice soft but full of hope. Richard opened his mouth to say no, but paused. Somehow, the word got stuck. Instead, he cleared his throat. "We'll see," he said, walking away briskly before she could see the flicker of warmth in his eyes. That night, as he sat in his empty dining hall, his mind wandered back to Emma's bright smile. For the first time in a long while, Richard felt the sharp ache of solitude, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, tomorrow wouldn't be so different after all. The following morning, Richard awoke earlier than usual. His schedule was packed, but strangely, he kept glancing at the clock, listening for that soft knock. When it finally came, he found Emma standing there again, backpack secured, smiling as though she knew he would open the door. "You came," she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Richard nodded stiffly. Yes. Let's go before I change my mind." As they walked, Emma's questions tumbled out like a stream. "Why do you always wear suits? Do you have kids? Do you like pancakes? Why don't you smile?" Richard found himself answering, albeit reluctantly, and with every answer, he revealed more of himself than he ever had to anyone else. Emma didn't care that he was a millionaire CEO. To her, he was just Mr. Next Door, someone who could hold her hand while crossing the street and listen to her stories about crayons and spelling tests. Days turned into weeks. Richard began clearing his mornings, scheduling meetings later, just to walk Emma to school. Neighbors watched in astonishment as the once grumpy CEO was seen laughing, yes, laughing, as a little girl skipped beside him. He even started smiling at people, something unheard of before. Emma's innocence had cracked open the hardened shell of his heart. One day, Emma didn't show up. Richard waited, pacing, worried despite himself. Finally, he knocked on her door. Emma's mother answered, her face tired and apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hale. Emma's sick today. She kept asking if you could come in, but I didn't want to bother you." "You're busy." Richard hesitated, then stepped inside. Emma lay in bed, pale but smiling weakly when she saw him. "You came," she whispered. He sat by her side, feeling emotions he hadn't allowed himself in years. He realized he wasn't just walking a neighbor's child to school. He was learning to live again. He brought her books, puzzles, and even his famous company chocolate bars. The grumpy CEO had become a gentle guardian. As Emma recovered, their morning walks resumed, but they were no longer just about getting to school. They were about building a bond neither of them had expected. Richard had found something his millions couldn't buy, genuine connection, love, and the healing power of a child's trust. Months later, at a neighborhood gathering, people watched in awe as Richard, once the cold, untouchable millionaire, stood beside Emma and her mother, smiling and chatting warmly. For the first time, he looked truly alive. That night, Richard reflected on his journey. A simple question, "Will you walk me to school?" had unraveled years of bitterness and loneliness. Emma had given him back his humanity. Sometimes, the smallest voices carry the biggest lessons. And sometimes, a child's simple trust can change even the hardest heart.